Thank you. I mean, that's an interesting point. I think it's a wrong one. I think what you're doing is confusing a gap in our knowledge, and of course science has many gaps in its knowledge, confusing a gap in our knowledge with a skyhook. A gap in our knowledge is just a challenge. This is something that we're working towards understanding, working towards filling the gap. So, I mean, there are plenty of gaps. You don't even need to go to the profundities of modern physics. There's a gap at the origin of life. Nobody knows how life began on this planet. We know once life had begun, we understand pretty well what happened after that. We don't know what the first step was. It's a mystery of chemistry. But we're not filling it with a skyhook. What we're doing is filling it with a kind of temporary waiting until we've found the answer, which is a very different matter. A skyhook is not just saying, well, pending future research, we're just going to have to leave that bit not filled in. A skyhook is saying, we are filling it here and now with a fairy, with a god, with an angel, with a unicorn, with something that we're positively postulating, which superficially appears to explain something, but actually doesn't. In the gaps in scientific knowledge, where we have no explanation, we're quite frank about it. We have no explanation. That's why we're working on it. There's a huge difference, I think.
Today I'll be discussing one of the most common contentions which is put forward by atheists, and that's the argument which is called the God of the gaps. Now, this argument, as the name suggests, it's basically the argument put forward that whenever believers in God or theists don't understand don't understand something, or there's a gap in our current scientific knowledge, then they attribute that knowledge to God. Then they say, okay, yes, we don't understand so and so, we don't understand X, Y, and Z, therefore the answer must be that it's from God, or it's God that did it. So atheists say that, this shows a level of ignorance on their behalf, that whenever there's something which they stumble upon and they can't explain it, then they attribute it to God. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be dissecting this argument which is put forward to see if it actually holds any weight, and what are the arguments that we can put forward in reply to this common contention. So the first point to begin with is that this argument of the God of the gaps, it's not actually an argument which disproves the existence of God in and of itself. For example, just saying to somebody that, oh, whenever you don't know something, you attribute it to God, that in itself is not disproving the existence of God. At best, we can say that it's a very weak, frivolous argument which is put forward by theists, and in fact it's not something which is put forward by all believers in God. It's something which may be put forward by some believers in God. And in fact I would even argue that in the sort of with the sort of very rapid advancement of science that we've had recently, some atheists even use this argument, so what I'd like to call the science of the gaps, in the sense that whenever they can't explain something, for example particularly metaphysical concepts, for example the existence of God, the existence of morality, the existence of the consciousness or the conscious mind, or the explanation of personal experiences, whenever atheists can't explain these these metaphysical concepts, they resort to saying, okay, fair enough, maybe we don't understand it now, but in 10, 20, 30, 50 years time, science will be able to explain it. And in fact, this is something which happened to me just today. I was having a discussion with somebody who's doing a master's in neuroscience, so he's quite clued up in terms of science, and I was asking him, from an atheistic or scientific point of view, how can you prove morality? Because it's something which is metaphysical. You can't prove it using your senses, you can't prove it using rationale, and you can't prove it using induction. And he said, yeah, fair enough, but in the future we will be able to prove morality. And I said, that's not possible, it's intangible, it's metaphysical. So I would argue that even scientists use this weak argument, where instead of using God, they replace it with science, and they say, yeah, we don't understand, but science will one day explain this. The second argument that I'd like to put forward is that we need to make the distinction between the how and the why. This means that even though science can explain how things work, in other words the physical, mechanical, physical processes which describe how the physical world around us operates, it doesn't tell us why these things operate or work in the way that they do. And even very prominent atheist thinkers such as Nietzsche had to acknowledge this limitation of science. He said, yes, science can describe how physical processes work and can describe the physical world, but it can't explain the physical world. So one example that I like to give is that we can explain in very in great depth how a baby is formed through the process of embryology and how it implants into the uterine wall and then the how it's born, but we can't explain why this happens. The reasons for why are things like a couple got married, they love each other, they find each other attractive, they want to bring a child into this world, they want to become parents, but science can't answer these questions. It can't tell you the why. So essentially what atheists like to do is that they like to conflate, meaning they like to mix up the how and the why, and they get the two things muddled up, even though there's a clear distinction. And even Stephen Hawking, he said in one of his books, yes, we can acknowledge that there's regularity and symmetry in the natural laws around us, but he says and to quote him, he says, but what is it that breathes fire into these laws, which allows them to explain the world around us? Because on paper, for example, the law of the conservation of energy or the law of gravity or the laws of motion, these are just equations and formulas. So what he says, what is it that breathes fire into them and allows them to explain the world around us? So this is what science cannot do. It can't tell us the why, it can only explain the how. Now, third and lastly, I'd like to say that what I just said about the how and the distinction between the how and the why, this is actually something which Islam has always acknowledged. And if we look back historically, even as far back as the Quran, which is what Muslims believe is the divine word of God, and we look, for example, at just one example from the chapter called Surah Al-Mulk, then we see God, he says to us, do they not see the birds above them, how they spread and fold their wings? So in this particular part of the verse, he's giving us the description of how the birds fly through the folding and unfolding of their wings. But then he goes on to say, it is only the most beneficent who keeps them aloft, the only one who keeps them up in the sky. So he's given us the description, or the how, and then he's given us the explanation, the why, that he is the one who keeps them up in the sky and allows them to fly.
أَوَلَمْ يَرَوْا إِلَى الطَّيْرِ فَوْقَهُمْ صَافَّاتٍ وَيَقْبِضْنَ مَا يُمْسِكُهُنَّ إِلَّا الرَّحْمَنُ إِنَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ بَصِيرٌ.
And similarly, from the prophetic traditions, we have the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. He says, whenever one of you is sick, then he should seek the medicine for that illness or for that ailment. So you see that Muslims don't have this idea of if I'm ill or I need something, all I'm going to do is pray. No, we're encouraged to go out and seek the necessary means to achieve our objectives. So essentially, Islam has always made this distinction between the how and the why. It doesn't conflate them, and even though it acknowledges, okay, right now we don't understand how this physical process works, and one day science may be able to explain it, we still acknowledge that the why must come from God, the one who created this, the original cause, who set all other causes into action. So that's my three arguments against the God of the Gaps argument, which is put forward by atheists. If you like the video, if you found it beneficial, then please like, subscribe and share it with your friends on social media. And I'd like to extend to you the Islamic greeting of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.